With respect to the FY22 budget, which we'll be filing later today, the proposal continues to make big investments in the Commonwealth and in the people of Massachusetts. Despite the significant fiscal challenges, our budget fully funds the landmark Student Opportunity Act, invests in our recovery, and leaves our rainy day fund at the same level it was at the year we took office, all without raising taxes on our residents. Over the past year, COVID-19's created numerous economic challenges. The Commonwealth's tax revenues have dropped significantly since the pandemic. Though not as badly as initially projected, the revenue picture remains somewhat unpredictable. Our new fiscal year 2022 tax revenue projections are basically about $1 billion less than the original projection for fiscal 21 that was announced pre-pandemic. Responding to this public health crisis has led to billions in unanticipated costs and expenses, and this includes using state and federal dollars for things like $1 billion through the Mass Health Program to help stabilize our healthcare providers, $60 million in field hospitals and isolation and quarantine hotels, $56 million to address food security issues, and another $41 million to purchase personal protective equipment. Our response is also being supported by the most recent federal COVID-19 legislation, which includes over $450 million for testing and tracing and nearly $90 million for vaccine distribution. Fortunately, due to our fiscally responsible budgeting over the past several years, Massachusetts was in a better position than many states to respond to the challenges that were created by the economic decline and the pandemic. Shortly after we took office, we faced a $1 billion structural deficit, but the commitment that we in the legislature made to budget discipline and strong partnership has led to balanced budgets and surpluses for the past several years without raising taxes. And as a result of that, we tripled the size of the state's rainy day fund, which we've been using to prevent deep budget cuts or tax hikes on our residents during these challenging times. With this budget proposal, as I said, we would leave our rainy day fund at the same level it was at when we took office. Over the years, we've also worked to save money and run programs more efficiently, and that includes things like managing the costs for major cost drivers like Mass Health, which previously experienced double-digit year-over-year rate growth before we took office. In the 2 years before we arrived, Mass Health grew on a gross basis by an average of 12% each year. By contrast, its average rate of growth for the past 6 years has been just 4%. That fiscal discipline has allowed us to continue to invest in other priorities around education, public health, economic growth, and support for local communities. And today we're submitting a $46.4 billion budget recommendations to the legislature. The budget fully funds the first year of the landmark Student Opportunity Act, provides substantial resources to promote economic growth and development as we work to recover, and helps ensure that public health during a pandemic continues to be there for us, all without raising taxes. We don't believe raising taxes on the residents of the Commonwealth, especially in the midst of all that's going on, is the right thing to do. Some specific highlights. First, with respect to education, last year we worked closely with the legislature to provide a $108 million increase in Chapter 70 funding to support public K-12 schools across Massachusetts. Together with the significant federal dollars Massachusetts schools received, these total investments provided more resources for local schools than the initial fiscal 21 budget proposal we made funding the Student Opportunity Act. The budget proposal we're releasing today builds on those substantial investments, as I said, by fully funding the first year of the Student Opportunity Act. And in 2019, that law was something we were proud to work with the legislature on and sign, and it will result in significant resources for local schools as it's phased in over 7 years. We're keeping the commitment to local school districts by fully funding the first year, and while we were able to leverage federal dollars to provide significant resources last year, we look forward to being able to begin to build the base of implementing this law into our Chapter 70 formula and our budget process here in the Commonwealth. The budget also includes over $246 million in new funding, related to the Student Opportunity Act, including nearly $198 million in new Chapter 70 funding with a particular focus on supporting school districts that serve low-income students. This means that this year the Commonwealth will be investing a total of $5.5 billion in our local public schools, and we're pleased to be able to make this historic investment in our students and our schools despite the challenging times. Additionally, our proposal would allow local cities and towns to count $114 million in federal support toward their Chapter 70 required local contribution. That would be in addition to our historic level of state support. That will help communities make their piece of this puzzle work in the next fiscal year. And to help schools operate safely during the pandemic, we facilitated access to over $1.3 billion in federal funding, which has been used to support a broad array of costs associated with alternative learning models, safely reopening, and maintaining school operations during and after the COVID-19 pandemic. Nearly $1 billion of this federal funding remains unspent between the approximately $800 million included in the latest federal bill, as well as the previous CARES Act funding, which also remains available to school districts to spend going forward. Schools are also receiving state funding for public health tools like our pooled testing initiative and air purifiers. So far, the state's purchased and distributed equipment to about 95 school districts participating in that block purchasing initiative. We continue to believe, along with the science and health experts, that the best and safest place for students is in school. And we urge school districts to make full use of these funds and these resources to bring kids back to school for their emotional and educational development. We're also continuing to support the ongoing economic recovery that we need to pursue here in Massachusetts and foster development and opportunity. We recently signed the economic development legislation that provides about $626 million in capital authorization from the legislature to drive economic growth and improve housing production and stability over the next 5 years. We're also in the process of awarding $720 million to small businesses through our Small Business Grant Relief Program. That initiative is the largest grant program in the country to utilize COVID relief funds to support small businesses, and we've been focusing especially on industries and businesses that have been particularly hit hard by the pandemic, like restaurants and hospitality. We'll be announcing the next round of funding on this tomorrow. And the budget we're filing today complements these efforts with key resources to support workers and small businesses, including $4 million for additional technical assistance for entrepreneurs and small businesses, especially those owned by women, immigrants, veterans, and people of color, and $1 million for regional economic development grants, and $17 million to continue transforming our vocational high schools into career technical institutes. This was a very big initiative in last year's budget, which we managed to do on a much smaller basis than we originally anticipated because of the pandemic, but we continue to believe that the opportunity to link more directly what's going on in our vocational and technical schools with what's going on with our employers is a huge opportunity to not only create work opportunities for students, but also to create work opportunities for people who are looking to change careers or people who aren't actually able to go to a vocational technical school, but would be able to go after school to a voc tech school to learn a skill that they could then use to translate into work themselves. And we believe this program, fully implemented, could train as many as 20,000 new workers over the next several years in very high-paying and available job opportunities across the Commonwealth. This budget also continues our support for the recommendations that were made by our Black and Latino advisory commissions. It's a $30 million investment in education, job placement, and workforce training programs, because we recognize that an unequal impact of this virus has had on communities of color and the importance of promoting equity in this economic recovery. These investments are another step in that effort. On housing, the Economic Development Bill also includes our housing choice legislation, as well as significant resources to increase housing options and production across the Commonwealth. And we look forward to working with local communities, local developers, and others to really make that sing. We've also launched, as people know, I believe, an eviction diversion initiative, which included $171 million to promote housing stability. And that program's already running. And in addition to that, we are about to receive about $450 million for rental assistance and eviction diversion support from the most recent federal COVID-19 bill, which should be a terrific asset as we continue to work on that. Together, those programs can all make a big difference in promoting housing stability here in Massachusetts and creating more housing opportunities as we go forward. The budget we're filing today builds on that and also includes $196 million for the emergency assistance for family shelter programs, $135 million for the Massachusetts Rental Voucher Program, $75 million for local housing authorities, and $55 million for homeless shelters for individuals. With respect to health care and substance misuse, in addition to recognizing the investments to address COVID-19 that we mentioned before, this budget also includes $79 million for Chapter 257 Human Service Provider funding, which is an update and a rate increase methodology that we implemented at the start of our administration. It was passed, let's just say, years before we took office, but never implemented by any administration. It was designed to make sure that private nonprofit human service and social service providers were adequately reimbursed for the services that they provide. We are the first administration to implement this program, and we've implemented it every single year since we took office. That $79 million will be a terrific investment in organizations that, especially during the course of this pandemic, have looked after, taken care of, and supported some of the most vulnerable citizens we have here in the Commonwealth. We also have funding in there for new key public health positions at the state lab. Obviously, the state lab's been busy. We expect it will continue to be going forward. $10 million in grants to health departments to support municipal responses to COVID-19, and $20 million in new funding for the new DCF Congregate Care Network, which is a big part of how DCF looks after kids. The budget also preserves the pre-COVID-19 pandemic eligibility and benefit levels for social safety net programs, which has been a critical piece of how we've supported many residents and families in need over the course of the past year. This budget also makes continued investments in behavioral health and substance misuse disorder, which we know are incredibly important challenges that have been completely exacerbated by the pandemic. At Mass Health, our proposal includes $84 million to help reshape behavioral health in Massachusetts. The biggest thing it does is creates a front door for treatment, a new centralized service for people or their loved ones that they can call or text to get connected to mental health and addiction treatment. This is something that many of us have been hearing about for a very long time, and we believe this is an opportunity to create a real substantive front door for people, especially when they're in crisis. All in, our administration has increased state spending on behavioral health services by over $400 million over the past 4 years. Budget also includes a total investment of $357 million across a variety of state programs to combat substance misuse disorder. These investments represent a $22 million increase over the last fiscal year and continue our historic investments in combating the addiction crisis. That includes $943 million to the Department of Mental Health, including an effort to restructure the Children, Youth, and Family Intensive Community Service Program, which will allow more children to live at home with supports rather than congregate care settings. I just want to say thanks to the legislature and our colleagues in the administration for the collaborative efforts we've all put into fiscal discipline, which has bolstered our financial reserves and made it possible for us to make these investments and to continue to support local governments, to continue to support education, to continue to invest in a variety of human and social services that are especially important during this pandemic, while continuing to be able to do so without raising taxes on the Commonwealth's residents. We obviously remain committed to ensuring that the health and safety of all of our residents are addressed as we continue navigating the pandemic.